Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm really honored to be here giving this presentation to everyone here in the crowd. And so, without further ado, let's get going on understanding the soil food web. Here I am, showing you that I do get my fingers dirty, taking soil samples, and looking at this soil. People often think that's just nothing to be gained by looking at the field itself, because what can it tell you? Well, it can tell you quite a bit. Because of the actions of the organisms in the soil, very different things can be happening. We want to make certain that we maximize that diversity of organisms. We maximize the numbers of individuals, so normal nutrient cycling can get going, so that the plant will turn on its immune reaction against diseases and pests. We want to make certain that the soil structure is going to be maintained by these microorganisms, and we'll go through all of these things that these organisms in the soil do for you. And we haven't really understood them very well at all. I like to, bring to you it's a kind of a funny story in a way. When I was a graduate student, just arrived at Colorado State University, my major professor, Dr. Donald Klein, um, and I sat down and we started talking about all of the different things I'm interested in. What would I like to do for a research project for my PhD? And we decided that I wanted to work on what, how to measure the activity of bacteria or fungi or protozoa or nematodes in the soil. How do you know what's actually performing a function today and what isn't performing its function today? So that sounded like a pretty cool thing to be doing. So my major professor then said, "I'd like to have you bring your project around to everybody and let them listen to you, explain what you're going to do, and then ask them if they think that this is a good idea. Is this worth doing?" And so I proceeded to do that. All, like 12 professors involved in soil in some way that should have all of these organisms present in it. And when I went to each one of those people individually, I would start out by asking that question: does the professor think that this is going to be a good product, a good project to do? And after I got done speaking to them about it, their first reaction was, "Oh no, don't! That's not a good project at all, because bacteria and fungi, these things in the soil, they don't do anything. They just hang around. They don't benefit your plant. They don't unbenefit your plant. So it's a totally useless thing for you to do this research." And it just blew me away over and over and over. Agronomy professors, soil science professors, environmental science people, it was a big flat no. But my major professor and I just sort of felt like, well, I think we're going to be opening up a whole new area of science. If that's the attitude that organisms in the soil do nothing, they're not important, aren't these people going to be surprised when they find out that lots of things are require the organisms to do the job? So, looking at this field, can we start telling something about what's going on in the soil? Or should we call this dirt, perhaps? Well, what's the difference between soil and dirt? And, that's the four-letter D word and the four-letter S word. Um, which is the pace? Do you need these organisms or do you not need these organisms? So, when we're looking at this soil, we're want to get an idea of what's going on, what's present in that soil. So if you look on the left hand side of the slide, you see a stretch along the edge of the road, and you can see that it's a light to mid tan color. Um, that tells us that we don't have the organic matter in here that we need to keep the microorganisms alive, to give your plant all these benefits that are shown in the food web that's been imposed on this picture. So we've got a lot of work to do to get this organic matter up where it belongs. It needs to be above 3%. Well, how about 5% organic matter? Yeah, that would be even better, because then you would have more diverse sorts of food resources that would enable a wider diversity of these organisms to be doing their functions and not be limited by a lack of food for them to eat in this. Well, is this dirt or is this soil? We'll go into that in just a minute. What's the difference between soil and dirt, the four-letter D word in soil science, and of course the four-letter S word in soil science. So what else could we learn from over on that side of the road? We look at the streaks, the different changes in color within there, within that area of the field, and we can get a pretty good idea that this part of the field has been anaerobic on a fairly routine basis. Maybe has been underwater for several weeks to months. And because of that, things are stressed. We don't have the right kinds of foods for the most beneficial organisms present in the soil. So, right from looking at their field, you can start to tell your clients that they've got a few problems that they need to work through and improve in order to get the biology back working for them. And we're going to go through all of that, those sets of things that these organisms do for you um, in my 45 minutes. Over on the right-hand side, as you're looking at this picture, on the right-hand side, you can see all these clods, all those black, lumpy, bumpy kinds of things, poking their heads out of this material, the sand silt clay that makes up the texture of this field. And those clumps of completely compacted, you pick up one of those clumps and you can't even break it apart. It's so hard compacted that any of the organisms inside of those clumps are not going to have the concentration of oxygen that there needs to be when we're working with terrestrial plants. Terrestrial plants are obligated or oxygen requires. They're obligate aerobes. So aerobic means that with oxygen, and aerobic means without oxygen. So the inside of these clumps, these clods, it could very well be anaerobic, and that's the conditions where many of our disease-causing organisms reside. It's where they come from year after year after year. And so you spray your fields with toxic compounds. They don't get into these highly compacted, oxygen can't move through, water can't move through, and the anaerobes are having a heyday, chowing down on the roots as they start to grow. So we need to understand all of these interactions, and then we need to understand what to do so that we get the advance on the problems before they start to reduce yields. So promised you that we would cover the difference between dirt and soil. So here we are. Dirt over on the left-hand side of this table. Dirt is the mineral components. It only has the mineral components within that material. The mix of sand, silt, clay, rocks, pebbles, boulders, parent materials, the things from which sand, silt, and clay come from. And yes, it does require bacteria and fungi to be chewing away at the outside layers of the rocks and pebbles, etc. But that's what releases the outside layer of the rocks, pebbles, boulders, parent material. That's what you have to have in your soil is the bacteria and the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, those organisms that break down the materials in your field, constantly producing sand, silt, and clay. And so what's your parent material? How much sand, how much silt, how much clay? That's what dirt is comprised of. Notice that there are no organisms necessarily in dirt. What's in soil then? What's the difference? Well, we've got the mineral components in the soil, but now we have to have organic matter. And we already talked about what's the percentages. We need at least 3% organic matter. 5 would be better. 10 would be even better. When I go and use my ability to grow plants, what is the organic matter level that I'm going to be putting around the root systems of my plants? And I'm putting them out in the yard, in my fields, in the places, in the landscape. We want to make certain that we're going to get maximum diversity of all the beneficial organisms. So we have to have at least 3%, but I prefer 100% organic matter. So a lot of soils people, when I would say that to them, no, 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 we need 100% organic matter. If we're really going to have good um, growth on these plants, we want 100% organic matter. And they would be so shocked. Well, your soil's going to go acid. You're going to have horrible problems. No, once your soil goes anaerobic, then the toxic chemicals, the nasty pH, the conditions that will kill those plants will now be able to outcompete the beneficial organisms in properly aerated materials. So, who does the work of making certain that oxygen can move from the upper layers of the soil down deeper and deeper and deeper into the soil? And people will often say, well, it's going to go anaerobic no matter what you do. Not true. Think about going down into the Carlsbad Cavern and you are miles below the surface of the soil. Do you have to carry an oxygen breather so that you can go down into those deeper caverns? No, no one wears, you look like you're an aquanaut or something going um, into the deeper and deeper into those caverns. As long as you have a way that oxygen can move, that's going to happen. So how do you keep your soil fluffy? How do you keep highly highly scientific term there? So how do you um, make certain that all of these airways and passageways are going to be kept open, that they're going to be kept wide enough? And that's a function of the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods, the earthworms, the incatrioids, all of the things in your soil. They are going to build structure for you. And so oxygen and water and your roots can move into that soil as deep as you want them to go. How deep can root systems go? And I believe I have a slide on that later. So you're going to have to sit on the edge of your chair until we can get to that part of the talk. And then, of course, the organisms have to be there. Well, where do the organisms come from? Well, they come from the later successional systems that are already around that place that had a catastrophic disturbance. And so succession starts to occur. Mother Nature takes a while to get from horribly, catastrophically destroyed dirt. That's all that's left is the sand, silt, clay, no organisms, no organic matter. And you're going to have to rebuild all of that. That's what nature has to do, as well as human beings ought to learn how to do this too. Um, and as you go step through the the successional system, which I'll go into in a few minutes, um, we have ever increasing productivity, ever increasing resistance to diseases and pests and problems. And as long as the organisms in the soil keep growing and doing their thing, you will not have erosion. You will not have runoff. You will not lose things by leaching because the organisms are what build that ability in your soil. So think about the difference between dirt and soil. how do you get the nutrients out of the mineral component of your soil? Because yeah, like 75 to 80% of the nutrients for your plants are going to be coming from those materials, the sands, the silts, the clays, the rocks, the pebbles, the boulders that are broken down by bacteria and fungi into each smaller group. So how do you get those organisms present? How are they going to come into your system? Well, anytime you have a mobile critter that can run around on the surface of the soil, they're collecting these really good organisms all over their bodies and moving these organisms into disturbed areas so that now there's an inoculum. Not everybody's going to wake up instantaneously because they moved to a new address. They're going to hang out, wait until the conditions are right for them to serve their purpose. So, how do we get all of this beneficial biology back into the soil? You're going to want to um, have the organisms in the system. One of the things I like to point out is that when we start looking at minerals in the soil, including the total as well as the soluble and the exchangeable minerals that you find in the soil, I want to point out that this is work from, um, I've taken out as I thought reasonable from Sparks' paper in 2003. We do have many references on everything I'm talking about. So it's not like, I'm just inventing this off the top of my head. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of papers showing this kind of information that I'm summarizing for you, putting it together for you. So when you look at the minerals that your plant needs to have, here's the element that we're looking at. So, like calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. Average or median um, concentration of these nutrients is such that none of these nutrients are limiting the growth of anything. So if this is the average throughout all of the different soils, and please note I'm talking about soil, not dirt, this is soil. And so we're looking at nothing that's going to be limiting. Your plant does not need 1.2 milligrams per kilogram of molybdenum over the course of several decades. These specific elements, individual elements, might be going someplace else, but you've got the bacteria and fungi working away on the surfaces of all of the, we just talked about them a few minutes ago, all the minerals that are in the rock, in the sand, silt, and clay, and things like that. How do you get the nutrients out of the silica bilayers where those nutrients, those elements have been stored? How do you pull them out of these forms? So massive amounts of nutrients. I mean, think about having 2,000 milligrams per kilogram of nitrogen. You don't have to worry in this growing season or the next one or the next one. You don't have to worry. The biology will provide as long as you have biology there. I always have to get kind of amazed by people that say a small amount of the nutrients from that plant when we sell that plant and now those nutrients are gone. The rest of that organic matter that's not produce that you're actually going to sell to somebody else, all the rest of that should go down on the surface of the soil. You're cycling those nutrients. So they were in the plants. Now you're going to put that organic material on the soil and let those nutrients be used by the next generation of plants or the one after that or the one after that. So I'm always surprised by people who say something along the lines of, well, I put mulch out, but it just sat there and looked at me, and all it did was to become waterlogged, and there was no way for that water to escape. And as somebody's saying something like that, I'm just going, they don't understand about the roles and the functions of organisms in the soil. If you put organic matter down on the surface of your soil, that organic matter ought to be completely decomposed and gone, turned into good soil within a 2-month period of time. Even in the middle of the winter time, as long as you're under the snow layer, that organic matter is going to be decomposed by the cold loving bacteria and fungi. So come springtime, if you're looking at something that all of the mulch is sitting there intact, there's something wrong with your soil. There's something wrong with the biology in your soil. Get the organisms you need back into that soil so that your plant can get all the nutrients that it requires. Now, there's other ways of plants to obtain at least some of these nutrients. So think about nitrogen fixing plants, or about mycorrhizal plants, mycorrhizal plant interactions, where these nutrients are pulled into the fungal hypha and translocated to your plant in exchange for energy from your plant gets the nutrients that it needs. Now, also think about the rhizophagy, recently discovered by Dr. James White at the university at Rutgers University, where he's talking about the plant actually attracting the bacteria around the root tips of the roots, pulling those bacteria into that root tip area, shutting the doors behind them, and then using oxidants, the plant will pull the nutrients that the plant requires out of the bodies of those bacteria. Well, the bacteria get a little upset by that, so they zoom up the sides of the root, find a root hair, and go out the door. Those bacteria will now take up nutrients as they travel downward along that root system. They're fully recovered by the time they get to the tip of the root, and they hang out there and wait for it all to happen all over again, over and over and over. How important is that source of nitrogen or phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, iron, all of these things? We've only begun to look at what nature does and really understand what nature is all about. It's all about these organisms interacting and working together. And I hope that I will have enough time today to talk about all of these things. So, the soil food web. Sunlight energy is captured in CO2 through the process of photosynthesis. So you're taking CO2, blowing off the O2. So all of that oxygen is going off into the atmosphere. Thank goodness we need to breathe too. And so the carbon compound is now bound carbon strands. And the energy to hold those carbons together comes from the sunlight. So your plant is a factory to produce energy. Well, that plant can't grow unless it has the nutrients it needs to build something other than just carbon chains. So when you look at that far left hand side, um, the nutrients, the energy from above ground, the sugars, the amino acids, um, the carbohydrates will move down into the root system in order to gather all the other nutrients that the plant requires. So, what are the nutrients your plant's going to get from below ground versus what are the nutrients that your plant gets from above ground? And people will always say, well, plants get their water from above ground. No, where it enters into the plant is through the root system, or the greatest percentage is through the root system. Maybe a few stomata were open upstairs in the above ground, and a little bit of water got into the plant that way. Nitrogen only through the root system. Sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, all the rest of the nutrients have to have roots. So how important are the roots of the plant to the plant? And there's a large amount of storage area in those root systems as well. Well, okay, so we've got the nutrients right here. how does your plant continue to increase that um, amount of nutrient that the plant requires in order to produce seeds, for example? So, the organic matter, the dead plant material through the growing season into the fall, that organic matter accumulates on the surface or down deeper in that soil. How deep? Well, we'll get to that. Um, the first things that start chewing on the organic matter using exudates coming from the root system are the bacteria and the fungi. So make sure you can find the bacteria and fungi. They're in the second trophic level and go straight up from there, and you'll run into bacteria first and fungi second. Bacteria tend to grow very rapidly. They attack simple food resources and then can multiply. And as they multiply really fast, they'll raise the temperature of whatever they're in. Fungi, on the other hand, grow more slowly. They require more complex food resources. So you can see there's kind of a split in the management that Mother Nature imposes on this system. Root feeding nematodes, we don't want to see them. And if you are managing this food web correctly, you will never see root feeding nematodes. Root feeding nematodes require certain conditions, slightly anaerobic, some kind of pungent smell happening, and the nematodes are probably cueing in on that. A root that's in trouble is going to draw these kinds of, well, it's really a cleanup group, isn't it? The the janitors of the system are really what the disease causing organisms actually are from um, an ecological point of view. So they're not bad guys, really. Easier for us to label them as this general bad guys, but I hope you'll recognize that it's only in certain conditions that they really become a problem. And that's only because we allow those kinds of conditions to develop, and we then continue to ignore them. And Mother Nature will come and get you when you let that happen. So, continuing on, bacteria and fungi are utilizing the organic material and the exudates being produced by the plant. Now, those exudates are formulated very carefully. Different requirements by the plant is going to be imparted to the fungi or to the bacteria, certain species of. And so, those organisms now are being offered basically that if you want food, if you want to have the nutrients, you've got to feed it some food, some sugars and proteins, amino acids, fungi, more complex materials. And so, there's the message is going out, the bacteria then make the enzymes, the fungi make the enzymes to go and pull from the silica bilayers in the sands, the silts, the clays, the rocks and pebbles, etc. And so they're going to pull out the specific nutrients that the plant is asking for. Hold those nutrients in their body. And of course, where are the bacteria and fungi located? Right around the roots, because where did the exudates come from? The plant. So, a coating of these organisms that are doing the jobs that the plant's requiring. And pretty soon, a protozoan or a nematode or a microarthropod, protozoa being bacterial feeding, there are bacterial feeding nematodes. If you look at the third trophic level, you'll find the nematodes halfway up. Um, Fungal feeding nematodes, of course, and microarthropods who are mostly fungal feeders. And so these three groups will chow down on the bacteria and the fungi. And because the nutrient concentration is so much higher in the bacteria or in the fungi, than what the arthropods, nematodes, and protozoa need, that it would be detrimental for the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods to keep all of those nutrients inside their bodies. It would kill them. So, what happens instead is that in this release, the poop, if you will, coming from these predators is released out into the soil, and of course, very, very close to the root system of the plant. The plant grabs what it needs. Bingo, got everything it needs. No, no, that's a little too much. And so other bacteria and other fungi will take up whatever the plant didn't grab rapidly. So think of the turnover going on in a field of whatever flower you want to think about, or any food vegetable that you think about, or any orchard where you're growing fruit. Think of how dynamic it is below ground, just zooming around with life. If you take a sample out of this material and look at it using a microscope, you will see so many things going on all at the same time. If you pull up a teaspoon, make your dilutions, and if you come to the Soil Food Web, the school, we have courses that will teach you even more than this, to a greater degree, uh, understand more about everything in here. And so I hope you can see that the benefit of these different ways that nature has put together to bring nutrients to the plants as required has been going on for the last, well, let's see, rooted plants have been on this planet for the last billion years. And of course, all this nutrient cycling, all this soil food web had to be present and functioning in each of the different climates. When does winter come? When does spring start? And all those variations. And she's put together a system that works in all of those systems. We as human beings need to stop ignoring this system of growing plants without any toxins. We won't destroy water because we'll clean up water when we get these organisms back into the soil properly functioning. So looking at, for example, we're looking at succession here. And when we first start in succession, catastrophic disturbance here. The bacteria, only 10 micrograms. Fungi, not can't even be found. They were all destroyed by whatever catastrophic disturbance occurred. So what's a catastrophic disturbance for microorganism? Tilling. Every time you till your soil, you are killing these organisms. If you till with machinery that, just completely disintegrates all the structure, everything, 50% of the organisms, the beneficial organisms in your soil are going to be killed, crushed, maimed, disabled for life. So easy prey for predators coming into the system. So the first thing that starts coming in as the bacteria are dying, suffering away, the first kinds of things that come in are mosses and lichens, things like that. Early successional weedy species. Now, your bacteria are up to 100 micrograms, while your fungi are at 10. So look at the fungal to bacterial ratio. As we move into the next, stage of succession, we're looking at things like onions and potatoes and tomatoes, things like that in this range. We're looking at 500 micrograms of bacteria, 250 micrograms of fungi. See how the fungi are catching up? And as a result, the plants that are best at utilizing these conditions, they're going to be the ones that grow, and the earlier successional are going to be pushed out of the way. Keep going. We go to row crops like corn and barley, wheat, lots of different grasses, perennial grasses in here, balanced 600 micrograms to 600 micrograms. You're selecting for those plants. If that's what you want to eat, then you might want to eschew the toxic chemicals. Gosh, using toxic chemicals to grow your food? Is that not insanity? Instead, go back to doing what Mother Nature does. Get the biology in the ratios that the biology require. And now you're going to select for your deciduous forest. Here's your orchard. 800 micrograms of fungi, 500 micrograms of bacteria. Keep going. Conifer, old growth, 700 micrograms of bacteria, 7,000 micrograms of fungi. And if this is truly old growth, this will be 70,000 micrograms. There is the fungi are the greatest component of a shovel full of that soil. And so, how do you control what you are going to grow and keep it there then once you've got it working? You've got to adjust the bacteria and fungi. Well, how do you do that? Well, stay tuned. Come and take some of the courses, and we will teach you about how to manage the biology that's in your system um, by using compost teas, compost extracts. These are not highly um, expensive. They don't cost much at all, especially if you're doing it as a small scale. As you get up into the 7,000 hectares of land, you will be spending a whole lot more on on the equipment that you need to handle that large amount of organic matter. But once you get this food web established, so it may have taken you 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 5, if you were kind of going slow at it, to go from early succession all the way through to wherever you want to stop on this slide about succession. Once you get all these organisms back into the system and functioning properly, you don't have to spend anything because it's already there. You might want to take your waste materials, maybe from your kitchen, maybe from the barn, maybe from the fields. You could compost some of those, get really good biology in that material growing and spread it out on your field in just small amounts everywhere. And then all of the organic matter that went down onto the surface of the soil, or if you planted perennial plants to help prevent compaction due to rainfall falling on the surface of your soil, that's the most compacting thing you can do. Lots of other things you can do, but the real damage is done by raindrops falling on the surface of soil that's not protected by that vegetation. So think about a drop of water coming from a cloud that's 5 miles up there. Acceleration due to gravity just means that something's going to get to the point and get to the soil surface, and smack, you've got a compaction layer down at 3 inches that you don't know about, but is going to cause anaerobic conditions in your soil. Going to select for weeds to grow. They're going to select for the diseases and the pests and the problems. We don't need to be doing that. We instead want to make sure we get all of our soil surface covered with perennial plants that don't grow any taller than your um, desired plant in the system. So go find some, 2 to 6 inch tall perennial plants that you can easily grow in your agricultural area, and you're off and going. Won't have to be buying anything. You just have to keep care of these organisms doing all this work for you in the soil. Thank you so much for listening to this, and please come and look at the many different things that we have for you to interact with and deal with and understand on our website, www.soilfoodweb.com, soilfoodweb.com, and have some fun reading all of the information that we've got. Thank you.